Hey, welcome back. Let's make some more progress with our 1978 Suzuki GS550 Cafe Racer build. Welcome to Urban Monk TV. So before I dive in this week, I want to touch on one thing and ask if maybe some of you out there would like to support a good cause. One of the builders and motorcycle vloggers that I love to follow is Andy's Motorcycle Obsessions. I'll provide a link below to his YouTube channel. He just seems like a really cool guy, and I like what he does on his channel, and I find myself watching often. And lo and behold, he's working on a GS, is it an 1100? Yeah, I think it's an 1100. From kind of the same era, a little bit newer than the one I've got here, this 550. But it's for a friend of his, and Andy has explained that this friend is 70 plus years old, on a very fixed income. They're in Australia, and I believe he, has their equivalent of Social Security is what he lives on, and this older gentleman would just like to get on this bike and ride it, but it does appear that it's going to need some significant work. And Andy has a Patreon page where he has people donating to his site, and I support that. And he has decided he's going to take funding from that and put it toward his friend's bike. And I just thought that's really cool. And so I've gone back onto Patreon and upped my donation a little bit to help out not only Andy's vlog channel, but then also his friend's bike build. And if any of you are interested in supporting this bike, this build project for this older gentleman that would like to just get back on and go for a ride, it's obviously a budget project, and I don't think that they're going to go and break the bank here or anything, but I feel like it's worthy of my support, and maybe some of you would like to throw your support at it too. So links below, and check it out. So one of the things I want to touch on this episode is why the GS550 for my build, and particularly why a 1978. That's really a few different reasons. Number one is I like the look of having the frame open underneath the seat, that triangle behind the engine and in front of the rear wheel and swinging arm. And normally that's filled up with a well-engineered air box and a battery and electronics, and you can't see through it. But it's a great look to have that clean and open. To do that, you got to get rid of the air box, and if you're going to get rid of the air box, people tend to go with pod filters. Pod filters look great, and they can be a fantastic way to filter air going into your engine if you buy good ones. There are a lot of junky ones out there on eBay and other places, so be careful. But to run pods like this, your carbs have got to be of a certain kind. These are what they call slide carbs. These are Makunis, VM22s, I believe, and these respond well to carbs. And by respond well, I mean you've got a chance in hell of tuning these things so that your engine is running right across all throttle positions. And I don't know what I'm dropping here. Oh, just the float. So I'll be careful standing up here. And so that's one of the reasons is if you get a newer model GS, you're going to end up where EPA regulations in the United States were driving a switch to, and frankly Europe might have been on board here too, I really don't know the history. But those constant velocity carbs can be tuned to pods, I've heard. I've never tried to pull it off myself, but I hear it's a very difficult task. And whereas these, I don't hear people complaining much about tuning these slide carbs with pod filters. So that's number one reason why I chose the 1978 vintage and not something from the 80s. The second reason I chose the GS550 of a 1978 vintage, and by the way 77 to 79 are the same, is the lines of this frame. This thing went straight to begin with, and building an aesthetically pleasing design for, well, really frankly any piece of art is all about lines, and you know, this one is a bit easier task to work with than an 80s model where they stepped up and got into more of a cruiser stance. And the third reason is this engine, and frankly its size. Double overhead cam. It's 2 valves per cylinder. You know, it's CBs of 80s vintage had 4 valves a cylinder and double overhead cam, and I love the CB engines of early 80s vintage. My CB900 was just absolutely one of my favorite bikes to work on. But it had CV carbs, and I left the stock airbox on that. Again, you know, this comes with the older slide carbs, the old Makunis, and it's a good, solid engine. They've got a roller bearing crank in this thing, so it's tough. It's overbuilt, and I should get a lot of life out of it. So, and I think it's a beautiful engine. I think it just looks pretty. Another reason why I chose the 1978 GS550 or any Suzuki of that era is this guy, Kickstart. Not only is there nothing cooler than kicking your bike to life, but it makes me far less reliant on the electric start system, which on a cafe racer you've got a limited amount of space for batteries, and on these older models the charging system a lot of times is not up to the task of a lithium-ion battery. So I've got a different plan there, but because I've got this to rely on, let's say 95% of the time, I don't have to be too concerned with a big battery. So that's another reason. The final reason is acquisition price. I was looking for, frankly, I was looking for a CB750 or a CB550. And I even would have considered at the time a CB650, but then I knew I was getting into CV carbs and that was going to be a different path. But anyways, everybody was on to the CBs of the 70s vintage by that time, and price was going up and up and up. And I really needed at the time to keep this a very budget-minded project. And you know, this was 3 years ago when I bought this thing off Craigslist up in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and people just weren't really on to the GSs yet. I think, you know, even my own channel here is probably going to help drive up prices of GS550s a little bit. I'm not the only one playing a part in that, but what choice do you have? You can't get a hold of a lot of CBs for a low price anymore. And it seems like we can still find GSs out there, and they sold a lot of these things, and they've got a lot going for them. They're good bikes, and they make great cafe racers. I think just as good as the Honda CB models do from that same era. And so I was able to buy this thing for $600, and it was running, and I could check, you know, all the gears in the transmission were good and shifted fine. It obviously had the big four: air, fuel, spark, and compression. And you know, if you got that, you got hope. You got a lot of hope. And I actually bought the thing, moved down here, and did the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride and a Venice Vintage Motorcycle Club ride with it before I stripped it down, and already had a lot of fun with this thing. So right out of the gate. So anyways, that's why the 1978 77, 79 are kind of the same. GS550 and GS750 would be just as attractive a model, and there's a lot the same about that. There you go. That's why we're using this bike for this project. So another question that's been raised on the channel by commenters is whether or not I believe that this Rustoleum Enamel paint that I'm using on the tank and intending to use on the frame is going to be fuel resistant enough for this task. And got a couple of plans there, but frankly, no, enamel paint isn't known for its fuel resistance. But I thought, well, let's go ahead and do a little ad hoc scientific experiment here in the garage, and let's see. I have a swatch using these exact paints, and you know, this is quite old and been through a lot, but let's put a little bit of oil and a little bit of gasoline on this thing, and let's see what happens. This is just motor oil, which frankly comes from the same place as gasoline, less refined of course. Well, I was going to put a drip of gas here on this side, but I don't have any gas in my spare gas can, you know, my portable gas can. And my motorcycle, the everyday bike, is so empty that I can't get any out of it, and the cars are actually kind of empty, so I gotta go to the gas station. Well, it dawned on me I don't have gasoline, but I do have kerosene, and not too far off in family. Difference here being, you know, kerosene is just less refined gasoline, if you want to look at it some way. Still coming from, you know, crude oil, petroleum, and but it won't have the ethanol in it, and that may be a defining difference. We'll see. There's a drop of kerosene. I'm going to leave that on there for, maybe an hour, maybe 2. Well, here's my logic. How am I going to interact with this bike? I'm going to fill it at the gas station. There's a risk of a spill on the gas tank at that point, but it's pretty minimal because I'm really adept at not spilling gas when I fill my tank. There's technique to that, and I'm sure any of you that ride have got that technique down. Go ahead and reference Easy Rider, the movie, and you'll see how those guys are. This is back when they used lacquer paints a lot, which is similar to enamel. It's also not fuel resistant, and they would lift that thing up and put their hand under it, and you see Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper doing that in the movie. That was common in the 60s, lacquer paint jobs. And so I don't intend to spill on the gas tank much. There will be some vapor coming out of the tank at the cap, and I think when I'm riding it, I'll be well vented there. And when I store it, I plan to pull that cover up. This guy. You know, I'm going to flip this up and just let the thing breathe, so I'm not concentrating fuel vapor underneath this cover. And what else? So then there's the frame and the swing arm. Ultimately, eventually, you're going to spill some gas out of your carbs somewhere. It's going to happen, and it'll get sprayed up, and oil will get sprayed up on the frame. Hopefully I've got a nice tight engine, but that's the area where I'm more concerned about a long-term exposure to fuel. On the gas tank, I'm going to have not only a quick reaction time, I'll probably have a towel from the gas station at the ready if I were to have a drop spill in the gas tank. But on the frame, I'm not likely to do that. So that's the area where the paint is likely to be exposed to oil and possibly some gasoline for a longer period of time. And then of course there's just all the road grime. There's petroleum in the road and in that dust, and a lot of acids and things. So that's pretty corrosive stuff, and the key there will be to, when I ride this, essentially a bit of a showpiece around, I'm going to need to clean it when I get home, so I'll have to plan ahead on that. So, you know, there's some downsides, I guess, to taking this budget approach that I'm doing in the garage, the DIY approach. I'm not against powder coating the frame and taking it to somebody to do that. Go for it. It's just not what I'm doing with this project. So, for better or for worse. So here on the swing arm you've got a dust seal, which is just this cap. You can pull that off. I'll just clean that up. It's in good condition. And then inside you've got a roller bearing setup with this inner, I'm going to pull this out carefully. The grease should hold the needle bearings or the roller bearings in place. But, you know, that's not a great color. And looking in here, grab a light. Oh, dead battery. Thank you, Harbor Freight freebie. Looking in here, those aren't even round bearings anymore. They're just flat pieces of corrosion. So definitely going to be replacing that. Let me look at the other side just for giggles. So, you know, those are actual rollers still in there. You know, and you can hear grinding. There's dust and grit that have gotten in there. A guy could probably clean that out if it's still tight, which this one is. And, you know, if both of mine were like that, I might consider reusing this, considering that I don't intend to put just tons and tons and tons of miles on this bike. It's tight, and those bearings were in decent shape. Well, sorry, bearing was in decent shape, but the other side is not. So I'm just gonna start thinking ahead and order up the new bearings and bushings for this thing. So thinking ahead a little bit, I was going to clean this up. I will do that, and you know, prep this for painting. But I now know that somewhere down the road I'm going to be having to press bearings in here, and I may need to heat this up and then cool those bearings in the freezer so that I've got a hot expanded surface and a cold constricted surface going into each other. And if I'm heating this up, you know, I don't want to be having to heat up my new paint or even just primer. So I'll clean it up for now, but I'm not going to go ahead with painting on this until I've completed the bearing task. So you got to think ahead a little bit about the chronological order of your steps sometimes. Just cleaning up this front brake caliper, and as you probably know by now, if you follow these, I use the kerosene to clean, and then I typically will spray the kerosene, which is oily, off the part with carb spray, carb cleaner. But on this thing, we've got a lot of rubber parts. You've got your rubber seal around the piston here, and then this guy over here is rubber. If you got rubber parts, don't use carb spray. It's hard on the rubber. It'll break it down. So I'm going to use brake cleaner on this, and we're going to have to be a little bit more careful about how we prep it for painting. So
You may have noticed if you've watched my videos long enough that my computer's changed on my workbench over time. I had an old Windows 97 PC that gave up the ghost out here, and no surprise there. I mean, it was ancient. Did the job for a while, but you know, things get treated kind of roughly out here sometimes, and I don't want to have a lot of money sitting out in the garage to be damaged. So I got a cheap used Chromebook, and this works pretty good. I can keep my PDFs for my shop manuals, service manuals on the cloud, and I've got full access to anything I would want to order parts from, you know, eBay or Bike Bandit, or I don't know, whoever you like to order your parts from, doesn't matter. So anyways, got to go get those bearings and bushings for that swing arm. Here's kind of my approach to doing this on a budget. I'll first go to Suzuki Parts House.com, who they've got a really nice breakdown. So Suzuki Parts, Suzuki Motorcycle Parts, 1978 parts, model, GS550. Swing arm. There's frame. Rear swing arm. So let's see, 3 is the bearing, 4 is the bushing. What else do I need? I can reuse that spacer in between, so I really need 3 and 4. So bearing, there's my part number, and 4 is a spacer. Do I need that? I bet I could clean up mine. I'm going to start with the bearings. Anyway, so there's my part number. Now I'll take that part number and search it on eBay. But here I know I can get the part for $14.31 each. Let's see what I can find on eBay with that part number. 09263 22017. That's all I'll put in. There's a genuine Suzuki bearing for more money plus $7 in shipping. But now let's just go ahead and sort price plus shipping lowest first. Looks like the best I'm able to do for a genuine Suzuki part would be roughly $18. These are all genuine Suzuki. Alright, so in that case, you know, maybe, I don't know what the shipping is over on SuzukiPartsHouse.com, but I do know that I could try searching without that part number. And let's just say 78 Suzuki GS550 swing arm bearing. Looks like people like to spell swing arm as a single word. There's a kit for from the United Kingdom for a lot more. Okay, so I've learned something. So sometimes when I do my little exercise of finding the Suzuki part number first and then searching eBay, I find much lower prices for something, you know, that's not genuine Suzuki part, but you know, for like a fork seal or something like that. Seals are pretty much all made roughly the same. You know, I'm sure there are some quality differences, but anyways, in this particular case, I did not find anything better than, Suzuki Parts House. So I'm gonna just try a couple other, like Bike Bandit or maybe Motorcycle Superstore, comparison shop a couple of these and grab that Suzuki bearing part for the lowest price I can find it. But at least I got the part number. Okay, so it's been a while now. In fact, it's been 2 hours. For my kerosene and my oil, let's wipe the oil first. This has been on there a little bit longer. That's probably 2.5 hours. This is about 2 hours. And I'm just going to take a clean cloth and wipe that off and see. I am not getting any paint whatsoever with that. None. There's been zero breakdown of the paint in that spot. Let me try it on the kerosene. Again, nothing. We'll take the Sharpie off though. So, yeah, that's really good. Okay, so there's our test. One thing I didn't mention is that not only has this paint been sanded and clear coated and then polished, but it's also been waxed. It's this, cheap turtle wax, automotive wax on that paint. So perhaps the wax provided just enough of a barrier to save the paint, but the truth of the matter is it simply did not harm the paint. For a couple hour exposure, if I were to spill a little gasoline or get some oil spray on the frame, I'd get it washed off. Well, in the case of gasoline, immediately. What would my thought process be? It would be 1, wipe right away with the towel that I've got at the ready. 2, I'd run over to the windshield washer thing at the gas station and dip my towel in there and get some of that, and I would wipe it off right away that way. So that would be like my emergency go-to plan of attack if I spilled gas on the gas tank at the fuel station. And then as far as any washover or spray that comes off of my engine while I'm riding back onto the rear parts of the frame and the swing arm, when I get this bike home, I got a power washer, I got a bucket of soap and water, and I'm going to wash the thing down because I want to keep this thing kind of show condition all the time, have it looking great. So there we go, Rustoleum paint, enamel. Is it the perfect solution? No, but it's a DIY solution, it's a budget conscious solution, and the stuff is more robust than I think people give it credit. Okay, so I've got a lot done here today, but you didn't really see a lot get done. It's mostly just cleaning parts, and we tested our paint, and also we'll continue on that path. I don't have any major part work that might be super interesting in the near future, but we got to get this stuff cleaned up, and the time I have is just on the weekends here, so it's going to be what it's going to be. That's a wrap for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this content, a little bit different, but also support Andy's Motorcycle Obsessions and his build of that GS1100, and or is it 1000? I can't remember. It's a big GS from the 70s for a 70-year-old man who's on a fixed budget. So let's support him if we can. No expectations. A lot of us are struggling out there. I get that. Thanks for watching. How about that for an ending?